Isabel Valdez, a wealthy woman, accuses a young boy, Tomas, of stealing her diamond necklace, sending him and his family into a nightmare of injustice. As the trial approaches, the weight of Isabel's influence and the evidence against Tomas seem insurmountable. However, amidst the mounting despair, an unexpected ally emerges: Maria, Isabel's housekeeper, who holds a secret that could change everything. Will the truth come to light in time, or will Tomas' life be ruined forever? If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The sharp click of Isabel Valdez's heels resonated ominously through the grand corridors of her sprawling estate, each step punctuating her fury. Her once icy demeanor had given way to a mask of disdain and indignation as she stormed toward her lavish study. Behind her, Maria, the housekeeper, followed with hurried, tentative steps, her face pale with dread. "This is intolerable," Maria Isabel spat, her voice dripping with venom as she whirled around to face her. The intensity of her glare was enough to send a shiver down anyone's spine. Maria, a weary woman whose years of hard work were etched into the lines of her face, stammered in a quivering voice, "Madam, please. There must be a misunderstanding. Thomas is a sweet child, he would never." Isabel silenced her with a scathing look, her hand slicing through the air to cut her off. "Sweet child. Don't be naive, Maria. That little criminal has been scheming under our noses. I saw the way his eyes lingered on my jewelry when he was here with his mother last. He's nothing but a thief taking advantage of my kindness." Maria's heart ached, her voice almost pleading. "But madam, he's only a child, just 12 years old. His family has been struggling ever since his father fell ill. They're desperate. Perhaps if we spoke to them." "Spoke to them?" Isabel's voice rose to a furious crescendo. "There is nothing to discuss. I've been generous enough, letting the neighborhood rabble do small tasks around my property, and this is how they repay me: by stealing what's mine." Before Maria could gather the courage to respond, the piercing sound of the doorbell echoed through the grand home. Isabel's eyes narrowed to cold slits. "It must be them," she hissed. "Go let them in." "And Maria," she added, her voice low and menacing, "you are not to defend that little criminal. Do I make myself clear?" Maria nodded, the weight of defeat hanging heavy on her tired shoulders, and shuffled toward the door. Moments later, she returned, accompanied by 2 police officers whose expressions were a mix of duty and sympathy. Behind them stood a frail, humble woman clutching the hand of a small, frightened boy. "Mrs. Valdez," one of the officers said politely, "I'm Detective Rodriguez. We're here about the alleged theft." Isabel stood taller, her back rigid as she assumed the posture of a victim wronged. "Yes, detective," she said coldly, her eyes flashing with contempt as they landed on the boy. "This child," she pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Tomas, "betrayed my trust. He stole a diamond necklace from my private collection." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Rosa, Tomas's mother, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she spoke. Her voice was desperate, a mother's plea. "Please, Mrs. Valdez, this must be a mistake. My Thomas would never. He's a good boy. I beg of you, explain what happened so we can make this right." "Make this right?" Isabel's voice was sharp, dripping with scorn. "There's nothing to explain. I saw it myself. He snuck into my room when he thought no one was watching and took my necklace. I found it hidden in his backpack. What more is there to say?" As Rosa's eyes filled with tears and Thomas clung to her, trembling, the air grew thick with tension, a storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. The accusations, the shame, and the fear hung like a dark cloud over the room, and the fate of the innocent boy seemed all but sealed. Yet no one could have predicted the shocking revelation that was about to bring this tragic drama to its climactic halt. Tomas, his eyes brimming with tears, clung to his mother's hand as if it was the only lifeline left in his world. His voice trembled with desperation. "Mom, I swear I didn't do it. I didn't take anything." Detective Rodriguez, sensing the boy's fear, gently knelt beside him. "Tomas," he said softly, "can you tell us what happened? We're here to listen." The boy wiped his eyes, his small frame shaking as he recounted the day's events. "I only came because my mom had to clean. I was sitting in the kitchen doing my homework when Mrs. Valdez called for me. She said she wanted to show me something in her room. She took me upstairs and showed me her jewelry, saying that if I worked hard one day, I could have things like that too. Then she asked me to help her with some papers on her desk. After that, I went back to the kitchen. I swear I never touched anything. Isabel's sharp laugh pierced the air, cold and filled with derision. What a fantastical tale. Do you honestly expect anyone to believe that I would invite a child into my private quarters? The boy's lying, plain and simple. Detective Rodriguez rose, his expression turning serious. Mrs. Valdez, with all due respect, do you have any concrete evidence that Tomas took your necklace? For a moment, a flicker of uncertainty flashed across Isabel's face, but she quickly masked it with a haughty air of confidence. As I've already told you, she said, her voice dripping with authority, I found it in his backpack. That should be evidence enough. Turning to Maria, she commanded, bring me the boy's backpack. Maria hesitated, her hands trembling as she left the room. She returned with the small, worn backpack that had seen better days. Detective Rodriguez took it from her, handling it with care as he sifted through the contents. As his hand brushed against something at the bottom, he pulled out a glistening diamond necklace. See, Isabel's voice rang out in triumph, her eyes gleaming with victory. That is my necklace. Rosa's face went ashen, her body trembling as she clutched Tomas tighter. How could this be? Tomas, how she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Tomas's eyes, wide and innocent, filled with terror. Mom, I didn't put it there. I don't know how it got in my bag. I swear. Detective Rodriguez exchanged a solemn glance with his partner, his face grim. I'm afraid we'll have to take him in for questioning, he said quietly, the words heavy with sorrow. No, Rosa's cry was heart-wrenching, her arms wrapping fiercely around her son, as if to shield him from the cruel reality unfolding before them. Please, there must be some kind of mistake. Isabel stood by, watching with a smug sense of satisfaction. Her lips curled into a slight sneer as she shook her head. There's no mistake. This boy is a thief. He needs to learn that there are consequences for stealing. It's the only way they'll ever understand. The room seemed to close in, thick with tension and despair. The officers, with reluctance, began to pry Tomas away from his sobbing mother, their hands gentle but firm. Rosa's cries echoed through the room, her pleas falling on deaf ears. But just as the tragedy seemed inevitable, Maria stepped forward, her face flushed with anguish. Wait, she shouted, her voice louder than it had ever been. All eyes turned to her as she took a deep breath, her gaze locked on Isabel. There's something you all need to know. Isabel's eyes narrowed, her sharp features darkening with fury. Maria, she hissed through clenched teeth, you'd be wise to keep your mouth shut and remember your place. You wouldn't want to lose your job, now would you? But Maria, with a trembling voice and tears welling in her eyes, stood firm. For too long she had kept quiet, and now the weight of the injustice before her had become unbearable. She had no choice but to reveal the truth that could change everything. Maria hesitated, glancing between Isabel and the devastated family in front of her. Finally, she lowered her head, defeated. I'm sorry, she murmured. As Detective Rodriguez stepped out of the room, he paused for a moment, glancing back at Tomas with a look of sympathy. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, and though his duty required him to remain impartial, there was something about the boy's desperate eyes that tugged at his heart. Inside, Carlos Mendez sat down next to Tomas. His suit was crumpled, and the weariness on his face reflected years of handling difficult cases. Yet, as he looked at Tomas, this small, terrified child caught in an unimaginable storm, his expression softened. Tomas, he said gently, I know this is scary, but I'm here to help you. I need you to tell me everything, no matter how small the detail. It might be the key to clearing your name. Tomas sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I already told them everything, sir. Mrs. Valdez called me to her room, showed me all her jewelry, and then asked me to help with some papers. After that, I went back to the kitchen. I swear, I didn't take anything. I don't even like going into her room, it's scary in there. And now everyone thinks I'm a thief, but I swear I didn't do it. Carlos leaned in, his voice calm but firm. Listen, Tomas. Sometimes people lie, sometimes they make mistakes, and sometimes the truth gets twisted. But we can't give up. We need to find out what happened. You didn't put the necklace in your backpack, right? Tomas shook his head vehemently. No, sir. I wouldn't steal anything, not ever. My dad's sick, and my mom needs this job. I wouldn't do anything to ruin that. The lawyer nodded thoughtfully, glancing at Rosa, who stood in the corner, her face streaked with silent tears. "We'll get through this," Carlos assured her. "I'll do everything I can to protect your son." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Isabel sat in her study, sipping tea with an air of smug satisfaction. To her, the matter was closed. She had shown everyone the consequences of crossing her, and there was no doubt in her mind that justice had been served. Maria silently placed the teapot back on the tray, but something in her eyes flickered a hint of guilt or perhaps fear. Isabel noticed and sneered. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Maria. Defending thieves, especially those you claim to know so well, is a dangerous game. Now, get back to work." But Maria's thoughts were elsewhere. She knew something was wrong. She had been in Mrs. Valdez's employ for years, and though she had seen her cruelty before, this was different. Something in her gut told her that Thomas was innocent, and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on her chest. But how could she speak out when her job, her livelihood, was at risk? As the hours passed, Detective Rodriguez sat at his desk, reviewing the case. Something nagged him, a gut feeling that refused to go away. The facts didn't quite add up. Why would a 12-year-old boy, knowing the risks, steal something so valuable from someone who employed his mother? And then, as he sifted through the details of the interview, something clicked. It was a small inconsistency in Isabel's story, something about the way she had described finding the necklace. He stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. He needed to return to the mansion. When Detective Rodriguez arrived, Isabel was caught off guard. "Detective," she asked, her tone laced with irritation, "is there something else?" "There are a few things I need to clarify," he said, his eyes sharp, watching her closely. "You said you found the necklace in Tomas's backpack, correct?" Isabel's gaze flickered for the briefest of moments before she nodded confidently. "That's right. It was right there in his bag." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. And you're certain of that, Rodriguez pressed, stepping closer. "Because you see, something isn't adding up here." Isabel stiffened, her composure slipping just a bit. "I'm sure, Detective. Why are you questioning me?" But as he looked around the grand, cold mansion, Detective Rodriguez's instincts screamed that something more was at play. "Because Mrs. Valdez," he said slowly, "if this necklace was hidden in the boy's backpack the way you described, there should have been signs that the backpack was tampered with or that the boy was acting suspicious. But no one saw him alone with the bag after you accused him. There's no evidence that the boy even touched the necklace." Isabel's face paled, but she quickly covered it with her usual mask of indifference. "You're reaching, Detective." Just then, a soft voice broke the tension. It was Maria, standing at the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "He didn't do it," she said, her voice shaking. "Thomas is innocent." Isabel whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Maria, don't you dare." But Maria, though trembling, didn't back down. "I saw you, madam," she confessed, her voice quivering but growing stronger. "I saw you put the necklace in his bag when you thought no one was looking. You did it on purpose to frame him." Isabel's breath caught in her throat as the room fell into stunned silence. The weight of the accusation hung heavily in the air. Detective Rodriguez's gaze hardened. "Is that true, Mrs. Valdez?" he asked, his voice quiet but dangerous. For the first time, Isabel looked genuinely shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched the arms of her chair. The facade she had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. "You were willing to destroy a child's life," Rodriguez said coldly, "just to teach some twisted lesson about power and control." Carlos put a comforting hand on Thomas's small shoulder, though his heart ached for the boy. "I promise," Tomasi said softly, "we'll do everything we can to make sure you get home soon." But even as he spoke those words, the weight of the situation bore down on him. He knew that cases like this, where the word of a wealthy and powerful woman like Isabel Valdez held sway, rarely ended easily. He couldn't let that discourage him, though Tomas was just a child, and his future depended on fighting for the truth. Rosa stood trembling, her hands gripping each other as if they could stop the panic rising in her chest. "Mr. Mendez," she whispered, her voice cracked with fear. "I can't lose my son. What if they don't believe us? What if he never comes home?" Carlos turned to face her, his eyes kind but honest. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Rosa. It's going to be a tough road ahead. Isabel Valdez has money, influence, and power in this city, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. We have the truth on our side, and we'll use every bit of it to prove Tomas's innocence." The first step is gathering witnesses and evidence to back up his story. If Maria can testify, it might shift things in our favor. Rosa's tears continued to fall, but she nodded, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Maria could be their lifeline in this nightmare. Suddenly, the door creaked open and Detective Rodriguez stepped inside, his expression apologetic yet firm. "I'm afraid it's time," he said gently. "We need to take Thomas to his cell." The word cell echoed through Rosa's mind like a horrible curse. Her legs felt weak, and for a moment she feared she might collapse under the weight of it all. "But he's just a boy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's only 12 years old." The detective's face softened with sympathy, but the law was the law, and there was only so much he could do. "I know it's hard, Mom, but we'll make sure he's safe and looked after. It's just for tonight." Rosa's knees gave way and she rushed forward, pulling Tomas into her arms, hugging him as if she could shield him from everything. Tomas, his face streaked with fresh tears, clung to her just as tightly. "Mom," he choked, his voice trembling with raw fear, "please don't let them take me. I don't want to be here. I'm scared." Rosa cupped his face, her tears flowing freely as she tried to be strong for him. "I will get you out," Tomas, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise you I will get you out of here. Just be brave for me tonight, okay?" Thomas nodded, though the fear in his eyes spoke volumes. The officers, trying their best to be gentle, led him away. As the door closed behind him, the silence in the room felt like a living thing, pressing down on Rosa with the unbearable weight of a mother's worst nightmare. Carlos stood beside her, watching the boy being led away with a heavy heart. "We'll fight this, Mrs. Rosa," he said quietly. "No matter what it takes, we'll fight." But as Rosa stood there, watching her child disappear from view, it was all she could do to stop herself from falling apart. How could this have happened? How had her innocent boy, who had done nothing wrong, ended up in a jail cell? As Carlos gathered his papers and prepared to leave, he gave Rosa a long, solemn look. "I'll contact Maria as soon as possible. She may be Thomas's only hope." Rosa wiped her tears, clinging to that sliver of hope. "Please," she whispered, "do whatever it takes." Carlos gave her a reassuring nod and left the room, but Rosa remained standing, frozen amid her grief, praying that somehow justice would prevail for her son. As the words "not guilty, Your Honor" echoed through the courtroom, a palpable tension filled the air. Rosa's heart pounded in her chest, her grip tightening on Thomas's hand. For her, this was a nightmare. She couldn't wake up from a cruel twist of fate, where her innocent son was being accused of something so far from the truth. Thomas sat beside her, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing courtroom. His eyes darted between the stern faces around him, the judge, the prosecutor, and Isabel Valdez herself, who sat confidently, as if already victorious. He felt lost, overwhelmed, and terrified. Judge Ramirez glanced at Tomas, his face expressionless but his eyes thoughtful. "I see," he said, scribbling a note. "Let's proceed with the opening statements." The prosecutor, a tall woman with a severe expression, stood and began her address. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are clear. A valuable diamond necklace worth over $1,000 was found in the possession of the defendant, Thomas Gutierrez, a 12-year-old boy who, despite his age, must be held at board for his actions. Miss Isabel Valdez, a respected member of our community, witnessed the defendant acting suspiciously in her home and subsequently discovered the stolen item in his backpack. The evidence speaks for itself." As she continued, Rosa felt as though each word was a blow, pushing her further into despair. How could they fight against such accusations when the necklace had been found in Thomas's bag? She cast a desperate glance at Carlos, hoping he had a plan that could change everything. When the prosecutor finished, Carlos rose, his demeanor calm but resolute. "Your Honor," he began, "this case isn't as clear-cut as the prosecution would like you to believe. Yes, the necklace was found in Thomas's backpack, but my client is innocent. He's a child, someone with no history of dishonesty, someone who had no reason to steal. What we need to ask is how the necklace ended up in his possession, and whether it was placed there intentionally by someone else." He glanced briefly at Isabel, whose expression remained cold and indifferent. "We will present evidence that suggests Mrs. Valdez's claims are not as credible as they seem." The judge nodded, acknowledging both sides, and then the witness testimonies began. Isabel Valdez was the first to take the stand. She walked with an air of superiority, her chin high, eyes barely acknowledging anyone else in the room. "Mrs. Valdez," the prosecutor began, Can you tell the court what happened on the day of the alleged theft? Of course, Isabel said smoothly. Tomas came to my home with his mother, who works for me as a cleaner. I was in my private room when I noticed him staring at my jewelry. I didn't think much of it until later when I realized my diamond necklace was missing. I immediately searched the house and found it hidden in his backpack. And you're certain it was Tomas who took the necklace? Without a doubt, Isabel said confidently, casting a glance at Tomas that made Rosa's blood boil. Carlos stood for the cross-examination. Mrs. Valdez, you claim that you saw Tomas looking at your jewelry and that you later found the necklace in his bag. Did you see him take the necklace? Isabel hesitated for a fraction of a second, but quickly masked it. I didn't see him take it, no. But it couldn't have been anyone else. Carlos stepped closer. And how can you be sure? Were there any other people in the house at the time? Perhaps the housekeeper, Maria. Isabel's jaw clenched slightly. Maria was there, but she would never steal from me. Interesting, Carlos said, his voice measured. So, despite not seeing Tomas take the necklace, you are certain it was him? Yes, she replied, though the slight tremble in her voice betrayed her confidence. That's all, Your Honor, Carlos said, returning to his seat. Next, Maria was called to the stand. She appeared nervous, wringing her hands as she sat down. Carlos approached her with a kind smile, hoping to ease her nerves. Maria, you've worked for Mrs. Valdez for many years, haven't you? Carlos asked. Yes, Maria replied softly, nearly 10 years. And on the day in question, you were also in the house. Yes, she confirmed, glancing nervously at Isabel, who stared back with a chilling glare. Did you see Tomas take the necklace? Maria hesitated, her eyes darting between Carlos and Isabel. No, I didn't see him take it. But you were there when Mrs. Valdez found the necklace in his bag, correct? Yes, Maria whispered. Carlos paused for a moment, then asked the question that everyone was waiting for. Maria, is there anything else you would like to tell the court? Anything you saw or heard that day? The room was silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Maria's face paled, and her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the stand. As she began, her voice barely audible, she glanced at Isabel, whose icy gaze bore into her. But then, Maria closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if summoning courage from somewhere deep within. I didn't see Tomas take the necklace, she said, her voice louder, now firmer. But I did see something else. After Tomas and his mother left the room, I saw Mrs. Valdez go over to the boy's backpack. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then she put the necklace inside. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Isabel's face drained of color, her mouth opening in shock. Judge Ramirez pounded his gavel. Order, he commanded. Carlos stood tall, his voice ringing with clarity. So what you're saying is that Mrs. Valdez herself planted the necklace in Tomas's bag? Yes, Maria said quietly but with conviction. She did. The truth spoken aloud hung heavy in the air. Isabel's mask of superiority crumbled, and the courtroom waited in stunned silence for the judge's next move. As the gavel echoed through the courtroom, a heavy silence fell over the room. Rosa's heart sank. $10,000 might as well have been $1 million. She glanced at Carlos, desperation in her eyes, and he gave her a small nod of reassurance, though even he knew the road ahead was daunting. Tomas, sitting quietly beside his mother, looked down at the floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. The tracking bracelet and house arrest felt like a punishment already, even though he had done nothing wrong. His small frame seemed even smaller in the courtroom, filled with stern faces and harsh words. Isabel Valdez sat back in her chair, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Her whispered conversation with her lawyer continued, her confidence seemingly unshaken despite Maria's testimony. The momentary crack in her facade had been expertly concealed, and she still appeared to be the dominant force in the room. To her, this was merely a temporary delay in her victory. Carlos took a deep breath, knowing he had to act quickly. He approached Rosa, his voice calm but urgent. Rosa, don't lose hope. We'll apply for a reduced bail at the next hearing. In the meantime, we need to prepare Tomas for house arrest and gather more evidence to support his innocence. I'll also speak with Maria in greater detail. Her testimony could be the key to unraveling this. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Rosa nodded, though her eyes were filled with worry. "Mr. Mendez," she said softly, "what if? What if we can't prove he's innocent? Isabel is powerful, and we don't have anyone else to help us." Carlos placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do everything we can, Rosa. Trust me, we're not alone in this. Some people will stand by you, and the truth is on our side. But right now we need to focus on getting Tomas back home and preparing for the next steps." As the officers prepared to escort Thomas out, now under house arrest, the boy looked up at his mother, his eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" he whispered. Rosa knelt, pulling him into her arms. "You're coming home with me," she said softly, stroking his hair. "We're going to get through this, Tomas. I promise. We just have to stay strong." Carlos watched them for a moment, his mind already racing through the next moves he had to make. They would need to secure a reduced bail, dig deeper into Isabel's history, and prepare a strong defense. But for now, the priority was getting Tomas home and keeping the family together. As they left the courtroom, the sky was still clouded with uncertainty. The weight of the accusations, the looming trial, and Isabel's shadow all hung over them like a storm waiting to break. But despite it all, Carlos remained resolute. He knew that justice, though slow and elusive, was still worth fighting for, and in his heart he believed that the truth would eventually come to light. For Rosa and Thomas, the fight had only just begun, but they weren't alone, and that was enough to carry them forward, at least for today. As the sky darkened, the weight of their situation seemed to press down harder on Rosa. The bitter words from Isabel echoed in her mind, but it was Thomas's question that lingered most painfully. "Why does Mrs. Valdez hate me so much? How could she explain such cruel behavior to a child so innocent, whose only fault was being in the wrong place at the wrong time?" Her heart ached with the injustice of it all. She held Tomas tightly as if her embrace could shield him from the overwhelming forces they now faced. "Tomas," she whispered, "this is not your fault. People like Isabel think they're better than everyone else. They think they can control others, but we won't let her do that to us. You are brave and you are good, and the truth will come out. I promise you that." Thomas nodded against her chest, but Rosa could feel the fear still radiating from him. She kissed the top of his head again, closing her eyes for a moment to gather her strength. The sound of footsteps pulled her attention back to the present. Carlos returned, his face a mix of determination and weariness. "I've spoken to the organization I mentioned. They're willing to help cover the bail, but it will take a little time to process. I think we can get Thomas home tonight, though. We'll just need to be patient." Rosa exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thank you, Carlos. I don't know what we would do without your help." Carlos smiled warmly, though his exhaustion was evident. "We're not out of the woods yet, but getting Tomas home is the first step. Once he's safe, we can focus on building our case for the trial." The mention of the trial made Rosa's stomach turn. The idea of going up against Isabel Valdez in court felt like an impossible battle, but she had no choice. For Tomas, she would fight with every ounce of strength she had. As they waited for the final paperwork to clear, the journalists had thinned out, leaving the parking lot quieter. But Rosa couldn't shake the image of Maria. The housekeeper had looked at her in a way that hinted at something deeper, a secret perhaps, or regret. Rosa had seen it clearly in her eyes. She wondered if Maria knew more than she was letting on. Could she hold the key to proving Thomas's innocence? Rosa resolved to try to speak to her again, despite the risks. Isabel surely kept a close watch on her staff, and Maria might be too afraid to say more. But if there was any chance she could help, Rosa had to try. The sun had fully dipped below the horizon, leaving only the dim glow of streetlights to illuminate the parking lot when Carlos finally returned with the news they'd been waiting for. "We did it," he said, a small but triumphant smile on his face. "Thomas can go home tonight." Tears of relief welled up in Rosa's eyes as she hugged Tomas tightly. "Thank God," she whispered. "We're going home, Thomas." Tomas clung to his mother, a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude in his eyes. "I just want to sleep in my bed," he murmured. As they made their way toward the car, Rosa glanced up at the darkened sky one more time, silently praying for strength. They had won this small victory, but the battle was far from over. Isabel Valdez wasn't going to back down easily, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. But as long as they were together, Rosa knew they could face whatever came next. With Carlos by their side and the truth on their side, they would fight no matter how powerful their enemy, no matter how daunting the odds. The storm clouds might gather, but Rosa was prepared to weather them all. In that pivotal moment, Carlos reappeared, his face brightening with a cautious yet hopeful smile. "I have some wonderful news," he declared with a touch of restrained excitement. "I've managed to secure the bail money. Tomas will be able to return home today." A wave of relief swept over Rosa, who embraced her son with an intensity born from the depths of her worry. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Thomas's face lit up with a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Mr. Mendez," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and relief. Carlos's gaze softened, but he maintained a serious tone. "Don't express your thanks just yet, Tomas. This is merely the beginning. We have a mountain of work ahead to prepare for the trial." As they made their way back to the courthouse to finalize the bail paperwork, Rosa was a bundle of conflicting emotions. Her heart was buoyed by the prospect of having her son home, yet a gnawing anxiety about the upcoming days lingered. Unbeknownst to them, a crucial moment was unfolding in the opulent Valdez mansion. Maria, the housekeeper, was making a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of the case. Her hands trembled as she dialed a number on her phone, her breath catching in her throat. "Hello," a voice answered on the other end. Maria steadied herself before speaking. "Mr. Mendez, this is Maria, Mrs. Valdez's housekeeper. There's something vital I must share with you about Thomas's case." The trial day arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension that filled the air. The courthouse was abuzz with activity. Journalists and spectators crowded the hallways, their eagerness to witness the dramatic unfolding of the case evident. Tomas, dressed in his finest attire, sat stiffly beside his lawyer, Carlos Mendez. The boy's anxious eyes darted between the stern faces of the jury and his mother, Rosa, who offered a strained smile from the spectator seats. Judge Ramirez entered the courtroom, and the bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise, the court is now in session for the case of the state versus Tomas Gutierrez." Once everyone was seated, the judge addressed the court. "Mr. Vega, you may present your opening statement." Prosecutor Ernesto Vega stood, his demeanor imposing as he adjusted his tie. His voice rang out, filled with commanding authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we confront a grave crime that shakes the very core of our community. This young boy, Tomas Gutierrez, has shattered the trust of his benefactor, the esteemed Isabel Valdez, by allegedly stealing a diamond necklace valued at over $1,000. We will demonstrate, beyond any doubt, that the defendant is indeed guilty of this egregious offense." Carlos Mendez leaned closer to Tomas, his voice a whisper of reassurance. "Don't be anxious. We'll have our opportunity to present the truth." When the defense's turn arrived, Carlos rose to his feet, his voice steady and resolute. "Members of the jury, I urge you to look beyond mere appearances and unfounded allegations. Before you are a young boy, not a criminal. This is a child ensnared in a situation he barely understands and accused of a crime he does not deserve. We will reveal the truth, proving that Tomas Gutierrez is innocent and that there is more to this narrative than what initially meets the eye." As the trial progressed, evidence was meticulously presented. Prosecutor Vega called Isabel Valdez to the stand. "Mrs. Valdez, please recount the events of the day in question." Isabel, impeccably dressed and radiating a barely contained indignation, began her testimony. "It was an awful ordeal. I had placed my trust in that family. I offered them employment when no one else would, and on that fateful day, I witnessed Tomas sneaking out of my room. When I checked my jewelry, I discovered that my most cherished necklace was missing. I searched desperately, and to my horror, I found it concealed in the boy's backpack." Carlos stood up for the cross-examination, his presence commanding attention. "Mrs. Valdez, could you clarify whether you indeed called Tomas into your private room on that day?" Isabel momentarily showed a flicker of surprise, her composure momentarily slipping, before she quickly masked her reaction. "Not," she declared with an air of indignation. "Why would I summon a child into my quarters?" Carlos pressed further, his tone persistent and probing. "Are you certain? We have testimony from your housekeeper, Maria, who asserts she heard you calling for Tomas." The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur, and Isabel's face lost some of its color. "Maria must be mistaken. It's possible she misunderstood what she heard," Isabel insisted, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. Carlos continued, unyielding in his pursuit of the truth. "Isn't it also true that on that very day you showed Tomas some of your jewelry?" Objection. Prosecutor Vega's voice cut sharply through the tense atmosphere. "This is purely speculative." Sustained, the judge confirmed, his voice echoing with authority. "Mr. Mendez, please restrict your questions to the facts of the case." Carlos nodded in acknowledgement and quickly adjusted his strategy. "I withdraw the question." "No further questions, Your Honor." As the trial proceeded, the tension in the courtroom became almost palpable. Witness after witness seemed to build a mounting case against Thomas, the detective who had discovered the diamond necklace hidden in Thomas's backpack. The forensic experts who verified its authenticity, and even several neighbors who testified to the boy's suspicious behavior. Each piece of evidence seemed to tighten the noose around Tomas, adding layers of anxiety to the already fraught atmosphere. During a recess, Thomas, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, turned to Carlos, his voice quivering with a mix of fear and frustration. "Mr. Mendez, why does no one believe me? I swear, I didn't do it." Carlos, his heart aching at the sight of the boy's distress, placed a comforting hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Tomas, I believe in you with all my heart. We're going to fight relentlessly to convince the jury of your innocence. Remember, we haven't yet had the chance to present our defense, and that's where our real strength lies." As the court session resumed, the moment Carlos had been anxiously anticipating arrived. "I call Maria Rodriguez to the stand." The tension surged as Isabel Valdez's housekeeper nervously made her way to the witness stand. Her hands trembled as she took the oath, and Carlos began his questioning with deliberate care. "Mrs. Rodriguez, please tell us in detail what you observed and overheard on the day of the alleged theft." Maria took a deep breath, gathering her courage as she prepared to recount her observations. Meanwhile, in a private corner of the courthouse, Isabel Valdez and her lawyer were engaged in a frantic, intense conversation. Isabel's face was a mask of anger and panic. "What did that traitor reveal?" she demanded, her voice a mixture of fury and fear. The lawyer, clearly agitated, ran a hand through his hair and replied, "I'm not entirely sure of the specifics, but it appears she disclosed sensitive information about your son." Isabel's face drained of color, and for a brief, horrifying moment she looked as though she might collapse. But she quickly regained her composure, her mind racing with the gravity of the situation. "That's impossible." Isabel's voice was sharp and edged with disbelief. "How could anyone know about that except?" Her eyes widened in dread as the full implications of Maria's knowledge hit her. Maria had been a part of her life even before her son's birth. She knew every secret, every detail. "What are we going to do now?" the lawyer asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he grasped the severity of the predicament. Isabel's gaze was fixed on the window, her mind a whirlwind of frantic thoughts and strategies. "We must act swiftly and decisively to silence her by any means necessary." The lawyer, his tone cautious and measured, warned Isabel, "Taking drastic measures now might only serve to confirm the jury's suspicions about us." Isabel turned to him, her eyes hard and cold with resolve. "Do you have a better suggestion? If this information becomes public, I will lose everything: my reputation, my position in society, everything I have worked tirelessly to build." The lawyer sighed heavily, recognizing the gravity of her situation. "Let me explore all legal avenues. Perhaps we can discredit her testimony, portray her as a disgruntled employee with a grudge who is fabricating stories." Isabel nodded slowly, her expression one of grim determination. "Proceed with that plan. But if it fails?" Her unspoken threat was clear, her resolve unyielding. The message was unmistakable. If the legal strategy didn't work, she was prepared to resort to more drastic and potentially damaging measures to protect her empire. In the dimly lit confines of the Gutierrez family's modest apartment, Rosa clung to the fragile threads of hope with fervent desperation. The small room that once belonged to Tomas had been transformed into an intense and makeshift operations center. The walls were now a chaotic collage of photographs, newspaper clippings, and hastily scribbled notes of visual testament to her tireless efforts and boundless love. Each article and image spoke of the desperate struggle to clear Thomas's name, a struggle that seemed to grow more daunting with every passing day. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Carlos made frequent visits, each one carrying updates and strategies for the appeal. This afternoon, as he and Rosa pored over the latest testimony from Maria, Rosa's frustration reached a boiling point. Her voice, laced with anguish, broke the silence of the room. "Why is this taking so long?" she cried out, her fist striking the table with a force that sent a jarring thud through the air. "Every single day that ticks by, my son is suffering in that dreadful place." Carlos, his demeanor calm and reassuring, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Rosa. Believe me, I'm doing everything within my power, but the wheels of justice turn slowly. We need to ensure that our case is rock solid before we present it." Rosa, her spirit visibly drained, sank heavily into a chair. The weight of her exhaustion was palpable. Sometimes I can't help but wonder, what if Thomas can't hold on much longer? What if he loses hope entirely? Carlos knelt in front of her, his gaze steady and compassionate. Tomas is incredibly strong, Rosa. He knows we're fighting for him, and we can't afford to give up now. Just then, the shrill ring of the phone cut through the tension, causing Rosa to leap from her seat, her heart racing with the hope that it might bring good news about Tomas. But the voice on the other end was filled with a tremulous fear that left Rosa momentarily paralyzed. Rosa Maria's voice wavered. I think I'm in danger. Isabel knows I've spoken out, and I'm terrified. The fear etched on Rosa's face was mirrored by Carlos as he took the phone from her trembling hand. Maria, this is Carlos. Tell me where you are right now. We'll come and get you immediately. As Carlos and Rosa hurried out of the apartment, the urgency of their movements was underscored by the ominous presence of a dark car parked across the street. A shadowy figure observed them closely from within, his intentions shrouded in menace. Back at the detention center, Tomas braced himself for another lonely night in his cell. Alex, a fellow inmate who had become a protective ally, walked with him to the cell door. Tomorrow is visitation day, Alex said, a hint of encouragement in his voice. Your mom is coming to see you. Thomas nodded, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes for the first time in days. Yes, I hope so, he replied softly. And your family? Alex's expression grew somber. I don't have family that visits, but it's fine. I'm used to it. Thomas hesitated, then offered, if you want, you could come with me when my mom visits. She always brings enough cookies to feed an army. Alex's surprise was evident, but before he could respond, a guard's sharp command interrupted the moment. To your cells. Now, as the heavy doors clanged shut, Thomas lay down on his bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. For the first time since his arrival, a glimmer of hope flickered within him. Perhaps with the support of friends like Alex and the unwavering love of his mother, he might endure this trial. Unbeknownst to Tomas, outside the detention center, a storm was brewing that threatened to alter the course of his life dramatically. Carlos drove with relentless urgency, Rosa by his side and Maria in the backseat, her face etched with a fear that seemed almost palpable. The tension in the car was a living entity, suffused with the weight of their dire situation. Are you sure you were being followed? Carlos's voice was tense, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror, scanning for any signs of pursuit. Maria, her face a ghostly shade of fear, nodded vigorously. Yes, I saw a black car. It was parked outside my house this morning and again when I went out to buy something. Rosa turned, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Don't worry, Maria. We're going to make sure you're safe. Without your testimony, our chances of saving Tomas are slim to none. As the car sped into the encroaching darkness of the night, neither Rosa nor Carlos noticed the ominous clouds gathering in the sky, as if nature itself was bracing for the storm that was about to unleash its full fury upon them. The air in Isabel's study was thick with tension. Her lawyer, visibly shaken, tried to mask his concern as he addressed her. Isabel, we need to consider our options if Maria testifies, he said, his voice edged with apprehension. Isabel's eyes narrowed as she turned towards him. She won't, she replied with a cold, assured tone. I'll make sure of it. The lawyer's face paled. What do you mean? His voice trembled slightly, an involuntary reaction to the icy resolve in Isabel's demeanor. Isabel's smile was devoid of warmth, her expression hard and unyielding. Sometimes accidents happen, especially in a city as dangerous as ours. A shiver ran down the lawyer's spine. Isabel, you can't be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Isabel interrupted sharply. I'm simply pointing out that sometimes things have a way of resolving themselves. She turned her gaze away, her tone dismissive. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important call to make. As the lawyer exited the study, his mind reeling with dread, Isabel picked up her phone with a calculated air. Her voice, when she spoke, was as cold as steel. It's time. Take care of it. Elsewhere, at the juvenile detention center, Thomas jolted awake, drenched in sweat. His nightmare had been a harrowing chase through an endless maze, pursued by dark, menacing figures. He sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. Are you okay? Alex's voice cut through the darkness from the top bunk. Tomas took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. Yeah, just a bad dream, he replied, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Alex's voice was soft but laced with experience. You know, when I first came here, I had nightmares every night too. but over time you learn to live with them. Sometimes you even miss them when they're gone." Thomas frowned, confusion evident. Why would anyone miss nightmares? Alex's laugh was a low, bitter sound, because in nightmares, at least you know there's an end. Here, it often feels like the nightmare never ends. Thomas swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "I'll get out of here, Alex. And when I do, I won't forget you, I promise." Before Alex could respond, a loud clap of thunder reverberated through the building, causing the walls of the cell to shudder. The storm had finally arrived, its ferocity a grim reminder of the chaos outside. Outside the detention center, the storm raged with an almost preternatural intensity. Carlos maneuvered the car into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the city's edge. "We'll be safe here for the night," he said, turning off the engine. "Tomorrow morning, we head straight to the courthouse with the new evidence." Rosa, drenched but determined, helped Maria out of the car, using her jacket to shield her from the torrential downpour. "Everything's going to be all right," Rosa said soothingly. "We're so close to the end of this, and soon Tomas will be home." As they hurried toward the motel entrance, they remained oblivious to the ominous black car that had silently pulled up across the street. Its headlights were off, and its tinted windows concealed the occupants who watched their every move. The storm seemed almost like a harbinger of the danger looming over them, a dark premonition of the trials that lay ahead. In stark contrast to the chaos outside, Tomas found himself in the quiet of his cell, only to be unexpectedly visited by Isabel. Her presence was an intrusion into the dark sanctuary of his confinement. Isabel's gaze was cold, her offer laced with a sinister undertone. "I came to make you an offer," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I can make all your problems disappear. I can have you released today." Thomas looked at her with suspicion and confusion, in exchange for what he asked, unable to fathom her intentions. Simple Isabel replied, her tone betraying no hint of warmth. "Confess to the robbery. Say you acted alone and that no one else was involved. If you do that, I'll use my influence to secure your release immediately." Thomas's eyes widened in disbelief. "But why? You know I didn't do it." A flicker of something like regret crossed Isabel's face, though it was fleeting. "Things have become complicated," she said, her voice softening ever so slightly. "This is your chance to get out, Thomas. Don't waste it." Thomas stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He was faced with a choice that could either free him or condemn him to a fate far worse than he had ever imagined. Thomas stood, his voice trembling with contained anger. "No, I'm not going to lie. I won't confess to something I didn't do." Isabel, rising to her full height, let her expression harden into a steely resolve. "Nothing. This was your last chance, Thomas. Whatever happens from now on will be your fault." As Isabel left the room, Tomas felt a gnawing sense of unease, as though he had just passed a test he hadn't even known he was taking. The weight of Isabel's ominous words hung heavy in the air, casting a long shadow over his resolve. The next day, the courtroom was a cauldron of tension. Carlos, Rosa, and Maria had arrived, their nerves frayed but their determination unshaken. Judge Ramirez entered the room, his face a mask of stern professionalism. "I understand the defense has new evidence to present. Proceed, Mr. Mendez." Carlos rose to his feet, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Your Honor, I call Maria Rodriguez to the stand." As Maria walked to the witness stand, the courtroom door suddenly burst open. Isabel Valdez stormed in, flanked by her lawyer, her gaze a mix of anger and something darker fixed upon Maria with an intensity that made the witness tremble. "Ms. Rodriguez," Carlos began, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere, "can you tell us what you know about the night of the alleged robbery?" Maria took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she began to recount the events. She detailed how she had seen Isabel summon Tomas to her room, Isabel's suspicious actions afterward, and finally she revealed Isabel's darkest secret. "Mrs. Valdez had a son years ago," Maria said, her voice quivering with emotion. "A child with a disability. She she saw him as a shame, and one day, he simply disappeared." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, and Isabel's face contorted with rage. "Lies, this is all lies," she shouted. Judge Ramirez pounded his gavel, trying to restore order. "Order in the court," he commanded. Carlos pressed on. "Ms. Rodriguez, do you believe the accusation against Tomas Gutierrez is related in any way to this missing son?" Maria nodded firmly. "Yes, I believe Mrs. Valdez blames children like Tomas for reminding her of her son. I think she framed Thomas as a form of revenge against all children she sees as imperfect. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Isabel's lawyer shouted objections while Isabel herself looked ready to pounce on Maria. The judge struggled to maintain control. Just then, the courtroom doors swung open again. A man strode in with a commanding presence that instantly silenced the room. "Who are you?" Judge Ramirez demanded, his tone sharp. The man stepped forward, his voice resolute. "My name is Alejandro Valdez. I am Isabel Valdez's son." A stunned silence followed. Isabel, now pale as a ghost, staggered in her seat. "Alejandro," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But you were dead." Alejandro's response was steady and unwavering. "No, mother. I was hidden by you." Judge Ramirez, regaining his composure, asked urgently, "Mr. Valdez, can you explain what's happening here?" Alejandro nodded, his voice carrying the weight of years of pent-up emotion. "Your Honor, I've been following this case from the beginning. When I heard about the accusation against Thomas Gutierrez, I knew I had to step in. I am the reason my mother harbors such hatred toward children like Thomas." Isabel's attempts to speak were stifled by Alejandro's commanding gaze. "I was born with a disability," he continued. "My mother, obsessed with perfection and social status, couldn't bear the thought of having a defective child. She sent me away to an institution and told everyone I had died at birth." Tears streamed down Isabel's face, but she remained silent, her world unraveling. "I grew up in that institution, believing no one wanted me. But a few years ago, I discovered the truth. I've been watching my mother since then, witnessing how her hatred and resentment consumed her. When I heard about Tomas, I knew I had to act." Carlos, having recovered from the shock, addressed the judge with renewed hope. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, we request that the conviction against Tomas Gutierrez be overturned and that he be released immediately." The courtroom buzzed with a mixture of astonishment and anticipation. The revelation of Isabel's past and Alejandro's dramatic entrance had shifted the case's dynamics entirely. Judge Ramirez looked at Tomas, whose face reflected a blend of relief and disbelief, and then at Alejandro, whose presence had turned the tide. The scales of justice seemed poised to tip in Tomas' favor, but the final decision lay with the judge, who now faced the monumental task of untangling the truth from the web of deceit. Judge Ramirez, visibly shaken by the revelations, nodded decisively. "Granted. Bring the young Gutierrez at once." He turned his gaze toward Isabel, whose composure had crumbled, making her appear years older in mere moments. "Begin an investigation into Isabel Valdez for false testimony and obstruction of justice." As officers led away a defeated Isabel, Rosa, her heart racing with anticipation, rushed to the door to embrace her son. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of relief and chaotic energy as the long-awaited moment finally arrived. Hours later, Thomas emerged from the detention center, squinting against the bright sunlight he hadn't seen in weeks. The warmth of the sun on his face felt almost foreign, and he blinked in disorientation. His eyes welled with tears as he saw his mother rushing toward him. "Mom," he cried, running into her open arms. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Rosa enveloped him in a tight embrace, her tears of joy mingling with his. "My brave boy, you're home," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. Carlos, standing nearby with a broad smile, approached Thomas. "We did it, Tomas. You're free." Thomas looked over his mother's shoulder and saw Maria standing at a distance, her face a canvas of mixed emotions, joy, and an undeniable hint of guilt. "Thank you," Maria, Tomas said earnestly. "Without you, I'd still be in there." Maria walked forward hesitantly, her voice trembling. "Tomas, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner." Tomas shook his head firmly. "What matters is that, in the end, you did the right thing." A sudden thought struck Thomas, and he turned back toward the detention center entrance. "Wait, I can't leave Alex in there." Rosa looked puzzled. "Who's Alex, honey?" "My friend," Tomas explained urgently. "He protected me in there. We have to help him too." Carlos nodded in understanding, his expression resolute. "We'll talk to the judge, Thomas. We'll see what we can do for your friend." As the group prepared to leave, a man approached them. Tomas recognized him from the courtroom. It was Alejandro Valdez. "Hello, Thomas." Alejandro greeted with a warm smile. "I'm glad you're free." Tomas looked at him curiously. You're Mrs. Valdez's son, right?" Alejandro nodded. "That's right. I want to apologize for everything you've been through because of my mother." Tomas, showing remarkable maturity, replied, It wasn't your fault. You were a victim too. Alejandro was taken aback by the boy's wisdom. You're a very special boy, Tomas. I'd like to do something to make up for all you've suffered. Rosa, protective of her son, interjected. You've done enough by telling the truth, Mr. Valdez. Alejandro insisted, please, call me Alejandro. I know I can't erase what happened, but I'd like to help, perhaps a scholarship for Tomas' education. Tomas looked at his mother with hopeful eyes. Rosa hesitated, but after a moment she nodded. That would be very generous, Carlos said, appreciating the offer. But first, I think Tomas needs time to recover and be with his family. Alejandro agreed, of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be in touch. As Tomas and his family walked away from the detention center, he cast one last look back. The building that had been a symbol of his unjust imprisonment was now a part of his past. With his family by his side and the promise of a brighter future ahead, Tomas felt a sense of cautious optimism. The storm of his life had passed, and though the scars of his experience would remain, the road ahead was now filled with the possibility of healing and new beginnings. The damage to your reputation is already done, the lawyer said, his voice tinged with frustration. What matters now is how you handle the fallout, and whether you can show any genuine remorse for your actions. It's the only way to mitigate the consequences. Isabel sat back, her mind racing. The facade of her once controlled life had shattered completely. She looked around the cold, sterile cell, her thoughts swirling with the weight of her choices. How did it come to this, she muttered, her voice trembling. The lawyer took a deep breath. This is your chance to start making amends. If you cooperate and show that you're willing to face the consequences of your actions honestly, it could influence the court's decision in your favor. It's not just about your reputation anymore, it's about your future and what you make of it from here. Isabel's gaze fell to the floor. The reality of her situation was sinking in. Her attempt to control and manipulate had led her to this low point. She thought of her son, Alejandro, and the pain she had caused him. For the first time, she felt a profound sense of regret. I will cooperate, Isabel said finally, her voice resolute but soft. I need to try to make things right. The lawyer nodded, his expression softening. I'll arrange a meeting with the prosecution to discuss the terms of a possible deal. You need to prepare yourself to fully own up to everything that's happened. As the lawyer left, Isabel sat in silence, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She knew that her path to redemption would be fraught with difficulty. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of understanding about the true cost of her actions. Back in the car, as they drove away from the detention center, Tomas looked out the window, his thoughts still occupied with the past but focused on the future. He felt a deep sense of purpose and resolve. Mom, he said, breaking the silence, I want to make a difference. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Rosa squeezed his hand, her heart full of pride and love. We will, Tomas. We'll find a way to make sure that other kids in trouble get the support they need. Carlos, driving with a thoughtful expression, added, I think starting a support program is a wonderful idea. We can use our resources and connections to make a real impact. As the car continued down the road, heading toward a future filled with hope and new possibilities, Tomas felt a sense of clarity and strength. His journey had been harrowing, but it had also led him to a place where he could turn his pain into purpose. The landscape outside the window shifted from the grim surroundings of the detention center to the more hopeful and vibrant scenery of the open road, symbolizing not just the end of a dark chapter but the beginning of a new, promising one. Tomas looked forward with a heart full of determination, ready to face whatever came next and committed to helping others find their way through their trials. Tomas's heart swelled with emotion as he absorbed his mother's words. The idea of giving Alex a place to stay, a chance to rebuild his life, resonated deeply with him. He turned to Carlos, his eyes shining with determination. Carlos, can we start working on the support program right away? I want to help other kids like Alex as soon as possible. Carlos smiled, his pride evident. Tomas, we can begin planning and reach out to the right people to get things moving. Your initiative has the potential to bring real change. In the kitchen, the aroma of Rosa and Maria's cooking filled the house, creating a warm, comforting atmosphere. As the two women worked side by side, Maria looked at Rosa with admiration. I've never seen Tomas this hopeful and determined. You've done an incredible job, Rosa. Rosa smiled, her eyes filled with a mix of love and gratitude. We've all been through so much, but seeing Tomas take something positive from all of this, it's what we've hoped for. As the evening wore on, the Gutierrez home was filled with the sounds of laughter and celebration. The kitchen table was set with Tomas's favorite dishes, and the family gathered around, sharing stories and plans for the future. Tomas felt a profound sense of peace and hope as he looked around at his family and friends. The warmth and support they provided were a stark contrast to the coldness he had experienced during his time in detention. Later, after dinner, Tomas and Rosa sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. Tomas took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. "Mom, thank you for everything. For believing in me, for helping Alex, and for supporting my idea." Rosa squeezed his hand gently. "Tomas, you've shown so much courage and resilience. I'm proud of you for wanting to make a difference. And you're right, everyone deserves a second chance, just like Alex." As they watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange, Tomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was filled with challenges, but he was ready to face them with his family's support and his newfound determination. In the meantime, Alejandro Valdez sat in his apartment, reflecting on his mother's request. The image of the young Isabel in the photograph was a powerful reminder of the complexity of their relationship. Despite the pain and betrayal, there was a part of him that wanted to seek closure and understanding. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 6 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The next morning, Alejandro decided to meet with Isabel. He felt a mix of apprehension and hope as he prepared for the encounter. If there was any chance for reconciliation or understanding, he wanted to take it. As Isabel awaited her son's arrival, she felt a mixture of fear and hope. The possibility of seeing Alejandro, of confronting the past and seeking forgiveness, was both daunting and deeply desired. In the hours that followed, as Tomas prepared for the next chapter of his life and Alejandro prepared for his meeting with Isabel, both faced their futures with a sense of resolve and hope. The journey they had been on had shaped them in ways they could never have anticipated, but it had also opened doors to healing, redemption, and new beginnings. As the evening wore on, the warmth of the meal and the genuine connections formed around the table created a cocoon of comfort and hope. The conversations grew more relaxed, filled with anecdotes and laughter that reflected the human capacity to humans connect, even after profound adversity. Alejandro, though still grappling with his own emotions, found solace in the camaraderie and understanding of Tomas's family. His resolve to confront his mother, despite the pain, seemed more manageable with the support of the people around him. Tomas's words of gratitude and insight had touched something deep within him, a reminder of the importance of seeking closure and understanding. Rosa and Carlos exchanged glances of mutual pride, their hearts swelling with appreciation for Tomas and his newfound maturity. Maria, too, felt a sense of relief and fulfillment, knowing that her courage had contributed to a positive change. As the night drew to a close and the guests began to depart, Tomas felt a quiet contentment. He had faced fears, made new friends, and learned valuable lessons about forgiveness, resilience, and the power of community. Alejandro, as he prepared to leave, approached Tomas one last time. "Thank you again for your kindness and understanding. I know I have a lot to work through, but meeting you has given me hope that things can get better." Tomas smiled warmly. "I'm glad I could help. And remember, even though it might be hard, you don't have to go through it alone. We're all here for you." With a final handshake and a promise to stay in touch, Alejandro left the Gutierrez home, his heart lighter than when he had arrived. Tomas, Rosa, and Carlos watched him go, feeling a sense of accomplishment and optimism. As the door closed behind them, Tomas turned to his family. "Let's get started on that support program. There are kids out there who need our help, and I want to make sure they get it." Rosa hugged her son tightly, her eyes reflecting both pride and love. "We'll do it together. You've shown so much courage and heart. I'm proud of you." Carlos, who had been instrumental in the planning, nodded in agreement. "Let's make it happen, Tomas. For you, for Alex, and for all those who need a second chance." The family gathered for a final embrace before heading to bed, their hearts full of hope and their spirits rejuvenated. In their small corner of the world, they had turned a story of pain and struggle into one of healing and new beginnings. As Tomas lay in bed, he thought about the future with a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were still daunting, but he knew that with his family by his side and a community that cared, he could face whatever came next. Outside, the stars continued to shine, a reminder of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And so, under the gentle embrace of the night sky, Tomas and his family looked forward to a future filled with hope, healing, and the hopes of making a meaningful difference in the world. The end. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey through Tomas's story. We've seen the power of courage, the impact of truth, and the incredible strength that comes from turning adversity into a force for good. Throughout this journey, we've learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope and the possibility of redemption. We've witnessed the importance of forgiveness, the strength of community, and the value of using our experiences to make a positive difference. We'd love to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned from this story that you plan to bring into your own life? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. If you liked this video, please leave your comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Your support helps us continue to bring meaningful stories and messages to you. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.